All right, Andrew, how you doing, man?
I'm good. You?
Good, good. I hear you had a late night last night.
Very late, but it was good. It was fun. It was competitive, so
Where were you,
it's always fun.
where were you guys at?
We were in Tishomingo, Oklahoma. Daughter was playing Tishomingo tournament. We played Dixon High School last night and ended up getting beat 3-0, but Camden threw the ball well. Girls seemed to compete. The girl we faced that they threw against us was really good. So, you're not when they're
So,
really good like that, you're not going to get a whole lot of base runners, but all you can do is just get in there and compete. So
so you mentioned something to me before we started recording here that there was a college there looking at the starting pitcher on the other team, which is a senior.
right,
Your daughter is a freshman,
yep.
but after the game, that school ended up contacting you guys or talking to her.
I talked to the assistant coach spoke to me after the game and just kind of touch base, which I believe now they can have contact as freshmen with players as freshmen, but I don't think you can actually sign or they were you see all this like craziness like kids verbally committing like in seventh grade and
Yeah.
stuff. Like they changed some NCAA rulings this past year to try to stop a lot of that. That's all nonsense stuff. That's all
Mhm.
just kind of ego stuff.
Yep.
Um, and so I think now you can't. I don't think you can actually sign until you're a junior now. So they
Yeah.
contact, but they don't really get too involved until they'll contact and they'll come watch you play and they'll engage, but they're really not going to engage a whole lot until you're a junior. Now I think that's when you can actually sign a letter of intent. Now is then, and
Hmm.
so they tried to curtail a lot of that. Like it's like seventh and eighth graders saying where they're going to go and things like that. They can't even have contact with them now in junior high. Any.
Well,
So
I bring that up because there's lots of stories out there of players who ended up being seen from schools that were there watching someone else. The schools
right,
went there to watch somebody else and end up seeing talent that they had no idea about. And then
yep,
that's often how some of these kids get their chance at the next level. And it speaks to the topic of you never know who's watching. You're always out there. You should be playing your hardest and all the things that good coaches teach players how to handle themselves, but you never know who's watching. And I think that little story that you mentioned to me, even though I didn't bring it up when you said it, is a great point to be talked about and shared. That you know you really have no idea who's watching, even if there's men, husbands, wives that are there watching. They're just parents. They may be within the next couple of years end up being a coach somewhere.
right.
And they're not necessarily there recruiting somebody at that point, but they end up, in a situation where they're running a, a higher level program, and they may
Absolutely.
be when they're trying to think of athletes who may be a good fit for their program. You never know. We saw Johnny play 2 years ago, as a freshman or a sophomore. I wonder what they're doing right now. And that, communication starts that way. But you just never know. And I would love to see more coaches who at that high school level, and I'm sure it happens a lot, but that are just pounding that into players' heads, how you go out there and you handle yourself, whether things are going good, things aren't going good, how you play catch, how you take BP, how you take your ground balls.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, just watch it all.
That was what was interesting to me last night at the end of that game. So Camden threw that was Thursday night, last night, but Monday she threw a complete game, full 7 innings. I don't know, 110 pitches probably. I don't know exactly what the pitch number was, but it was definitely a workload and the last 2 innings of that was pretty high stress innings. The sixth and the seventh, they end up winning, but she had 2 days of rest and had to come back on Thursday and through last night. And so she was 3 or 4 miles an hour slower than she typically was. She sits 62, 65, and last night she was more like 60 to 63. And then she really lost a lot of velo as the game went on, just from fatigue. She's 14. She don't have that engine that an 18-year-old senior would.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that the coach talked to me about, so I say all that because when she started losing some of her velo, they started putting some barrels on the ball, and she started getting. I think she ended up giving up 5 hits total, but there was a couple of those that were just they were squared up and hit really well. And she don't
Mm-hmm.
experience a lot of that because she throws so hard. But when she starts losing velo, then she starts becoming hittable, just like everybody else does. And into softball is the same in baseball. When you start getting fatigued, the ball starts getting up in the zone also, just like baseball does. And so
Mm-hmm.
when you start losing velo and the ball starts getting elevated in the zone, it's that's a
It's getting flatter.
recipe to, yeah, the ball gets flat and then it becomes real hittable. But one of the things the coach told me last night, he said one of the things we look for is how they handle themselves when things are not going their way. And he said it's not
Mm-hmm.
like your daughter just got hit in the mouth, but she got behind last night. They got ahead and she gave up a few hits late. But he said she never wavered in that circle. You never seen any type of body
Mm-hmm.
language. You never saw frustration. He said he goes, that's what I was more impressed with than anything that I seen,
Mm-hmm.
was how she handled herself when it wasn't going her way out there. And
Mm-hmm.
and it's what you and I have spoke about too, that people don't understand, that I don't care how good you are. You take Justin Verlander in the bigs, or heck, Nolan Ryan, the hardest thrower probably who ever lived. There were days he got hit, and there were days that he
Mm-hmm.
gave up 6, 7 runs. You go out there some days and you don't have your good stuff. You know what I mean by that. Like, there's some days you go out there and you feel like you have a lightning bolt on your arm, and then some days you feel like you're throwing a bowling ball. It is, you're not going to have that tier top stuff every time you take the field. And that's why it's very important to learn how to be a pitcher, not a thrower. That's something I really preach to my daughter, is you got to learn how to pitch so that when you don't have your good stuff, you can still get people out. But
Yeah.
with that being said, is what we were talking about today, was dealing with adversity and how to prepare for failure, knowing that in this
Mm-hmm.
game you're going to experience that. You're going to fail in
Yeah.
this game, and you're going to have to deal with feeling like you let yourself down, feeling like you let your coach down, feeling like you let your teammates down. You're going to deal with those emotions. You're going to deal with the frustration of, you know, I didn't have my good stuff, but am I going to blame it because the umpire missed some calls, you know,
Mm-hmm.
or blame it on whatever, and instead of using that as a tool to be able to grow and learn from. And that goes back to what we've talked about
Yeah.
before. When you get uh, development minded, and really can get your players and get people to understand this is about development, I think it's a little easier to deal with those failures, because you realize I'm always trying to just learn and grow, instead of this is about, well, I didn't strike out 15 and look like the stud, and so I'm upset. And so that's some of my thoughts on trying to help kids prepare for failure. But what's your thoughts on that, man?
Well, I don't think um, talking about how to handle failure is talked about enough. I think it goes even deeper, where kind of this all starts is how people, I don't know if identify is the right word, but how people see themselves when we're younger, right? When we're in high school or even younger, we see each other as, you know, they're a baseball player, they're a football player, they're a soccer guy. So we identify when we're younger as athletes, and that's usually, when we're younger, it's all physical stuff. You know, the mental
Right.
stuff. We never talk about like, hey man, that's a tough player, man. He keeps his head in there when things aren't going his way. That, you know, all we talk about is, you know, when we're younger, we notice, man, that guy can hit the ball really far. Did you hear about that shot he hit?
Yep.
Or they throw fast, right? And it's not, excuse me, that's how we identify as young athletes. And when I say young, I'm talking about even into high school, even in the college, and even young professionals. They identify, you know, themselves as their physical abilities. You know, we look at each
Yep.
other and think about each other with what someone's physical abilities are. And that's what is talked about. It's what's practiced, it's what's worked on. But then as we get older, you know, and it be, you know, all of a sudden you're around everybody's that's good, as good as you are, if not better. All of a sudden you realize that that's not, it doesn't necessarily make you special anymore. And
Yes.
for you to keep playing longer, you know, as long as you want to, you, there has to be a different side of you that makes you good. And that's going to come down to what's going on between your ears. And I've found with, we all fail. We've talked about it. You know, I could tell you about all of my negative stats and how I feel when it came to my career. Those were more impactful than all the positive stats. Like I achieved a lot of those positive stats because of the negative stats, which, you know, fortunately in my case, I was able to play long enough to work through that. Not everybody has that luxury. Um, but most of my negative stats, if you were to look, you know, they happened early on in my career. They didn't happen as frequent as often later in my career. So again, they were all those, you know, if you want to call them negative moments, you know, led to more positive moments because I finally got my head on straight. Um, I have found that with young athletes, we're going to help them more understand this part of the game if we reflect and share some of those moments that we weren't our best, you know. And
Right.
you know, I gave up over 150 home runs in my career, right? Which I'll ask kids sometime when they're talking about, you know, maybe a negative day or they gave up a home run, you know, they gave up the first home run they've ever given up, and you know, they feel awful about it. It's like it's the end of the world. They're embarrassed. And, you know, I
Right.
go down, you know, I ask them, how many do you think that I gave up in my career? And, you know, their answers are usually, you know, maybe 10, maybe 20. And it, once I finally tell them how many it was, how many I gave up, you know, they're like, their eyes get big. It's like, oh my
Yeah.
God, you know, they think that professional athletes never fail, you know,
Right.
and when you, they look up to us as former, you know, even whether we played in college or even if high school, they look up to us because we're adults. Okay, not necessarily because
Yep.
of what we accomplished. Some of the kids may not even know what you accomplished. They may not even know that you played, that you were a college athlete or played professionally. They may not even know it, right? But
Right.
they just look up to you because you're an adult and you have a relationship with them, and you know they feel that you're helping them. Um, but when you start getting down in those deep conversations of, I had plenty of moments where at the end of the day, that loss was next to my name, right? At the end of the day, I
Right.
walked more batters than innings I pitched, right? It happened. I gave up more runs than innings I pitched. Okay, that happened many times. And helping them understand that, you know, giving them a little bit of relief and understanding that you had a bad day, but I had way more bad days than you've ever had in your life.
Yep.
And the more we talk about it, I think the more it puts their mind at ease, you know, that it is a part of it. And then from that, there needs to be a constant conversation of, just like you said, the failure is going to happen, but how do we use it, you know, for positive? You know, how do we use it to, as a lesson to get better from? instead of a lot of these kids, they have a bad day and the car ride home or the looks that the parents give, the passive aggressive comments that are made, from adults, whether it's coaches or parents, it ends up just, these kids become scared to fail, because
That's right.
of the backlash and the negativity that they're going to feel. And to be honest, this sort of thing we're talking about has pushed a lot of athletes out of the game, simply because they could never get a grasp on how to handle the failures,
Yep.
and or they got tired of all of the emotions that they got from adults when things didn't go their way.
That's right. That's one of the, I'm trying to think of the guy, his name on online, but he's the quality at bat guy. And I'm trying to think of his name.
It's Springer.
Is it Steve Springer? Is that right? Is it Steve
Yep.
Springer?
Yes.
And so, one of the things I really like some of his content because, he talks about a lot on the quality of bats, like what we were speaking about before we started with my daughter last night. The girl they were facing was a senior, and she's good. I mean, she's a really good pitcher. And and Camden she had 2 at bats last night and worked a 7 or 8 pitch at bat walk. Her first at bat, hit a ball really hard, pulled it foul. And then her second at bat, walked a 8 or 10 pitch, worked it to a full count, fouled 2 or 3 balls off, then hit a fly ball to left field. She was 0 for 1 in the books, but she had 2 really quality ABs. 0 for 1, I guess. 0 for 1 in the books with a walk, but she had 2 really quality at bats last night. And so we talked about that. And instead of being upset that I didn't get a hit, she was like, why the ball she flew up the left field? I mean, she put a really good swing on it. It was just time. She was just a little bit off of it from hitting it out. I mean, a deep fly ball, she just missed it. And then she was like, why'd I miss that? So, I mean, your swing was perfectly fine. It was just probably you're just off of it, just a little ball, had a little bit more movement. And there's so many variables,
Yep.
I mean, she swung at a rise ball, the thing's moving, it's rising up. So, I mean, it's got movement on it, you just missed it. And but the conversation was around, you had 2 really good at bats at 14 years old against an 18-year-old pitcher who's going to college. Like, that's a win. That was a win for
Absolutely.
her. That wasn't a, and I think a lot of people don't understand that the game is so hard that sometimes you lose, sometimes a loss is a win, in a sense. Like that's how hard the game is. And especially when you start getting up into the higher levels in the sport, and understanding that, and letting your kid know and letting your player know that, like I said, just because you lost, you might have won. That was a good prerequisite. I talked to some of the parents last night because we don't face a lot of girls like that. You just don't in high school. They're pretty few and far between. But a guy who's driving, the first time you ever go 100 miles an hour in a car, it seems like it's just so fast, but 100 miles an hour to a NASCAR driver is not going to seem very fast. And it's because they're conditioned to that. They have seen it so much, and it actually slows down for them. And the only way that players get better, like baseball, 90 seems fast until you see 90 all the time, and then 90 becomes the norm. And in softball, you see 60 seems fast until you see 60 all the time. And the thing is that when you start getting into those higher levels, the game, you get conditioned to be able to compete at that level. But there also comes with that to understand that, just like at 100 miles an hour, if you're going 100 miles an hour in a car, there's less room for error. You can make more mistakes, just like you can have a bad swing and hit 75 in baseball, but you're not going to have a bad swing and hit 90 consistently. And so there's less room for error because the game speeds up. And so the players have to understand that with that, you're going to fail because the game is so much faster. But at the same time, the only way you get conditioned to it is to keep going back to it. You have to keep seeing 90 until you can figure out how to catch up to that and how to hit that. But at the same time, understanding that my my room for error is smaller, so there's probably going to be less hits at that. There's going to be less hits at 100 than there is 95, or at 90 and 85 and 80 and on down the line. And just letting athletes and letting players understand that there is room for failure in this game. And if we don't make that as a point as coaches and as parents to let them have room for failure, that's the reason most kids go out and play, and they never can really let it loose. They can't cut it loose on the field because they play with so much fear, because we don't let them have room for error. And that there's a I work with a lot of hitters, and one of the things that we talk about a lot, and I have to work with them, is let's say in BP, they'll swing and miss a ball and foul it off or pop it up. What's wrong with my swing? I'm like, there's nothing wrong with your swing. Like, your swing was perfectly fine. Your timing was off a little bit or whatever, but there wasn't anything wrong with your swing just because you didn't get the desired outcome you wanted. Just because you didn't get the desired outcome you wanted doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It doesn't mean you did anything wrong. And I think that's one of the things of trying to preach that to our kids and our athletes is you may do everything right and it still fail. You may still get out. You may still get that loss. I mean, God, you could go out and pitch your guts out and lose 1-0, you know. And those are things that it's just the nature of the game we play. And it's a game, if you want to see higher percentage things, go play a different game. But if you're choosing to play softball and baseball, you're going to have to deal with low percentages of success rate, especially in the box. I mean, when you step in that batter's box, you're on below half for success rate. 3 and 400 is
Yeah.
3 and 4 times out of 10. That means you're failing more than you
Yeah.
succeed. And just trying to have players accept that emotionally. If they can accept that emotionally, then they can start developing, and they can take their losses and go, okay, what can I do to learn from that?
Well, as adults, we need to collectively understand what the process really means. And again, we've talked about this before, but the process requires so much patience, and the process requires so many reps, whether it's practice reps, game reps, thousands, seasons, right? Not
Right.
just a week, not just a tournament, not just a couple tournaments. Like, the process never ends. And the level of patience is 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 too short, in my opinion, for a lot of adults, whether it's parents or coaches. And the panic button gets pushed way too soon.
Yes.
One of my biggest problems, issues, complaints, whatever you want to call it, with the tournament style is that, because of what tournament is, we're playing the playoffs, we're playing the World Series literally every weekend. The
Yeah.
emotions that come with that, trying to get to the next game. We got to win this game to get to the championship game, blah, blah, blah. It's freaking youth baseball. It's not, it's not the big leagues. Nobody's getting paid millions of dollars out here.
Right.
The patience is so thin. The panic button gets pushed so quick. The emotions are so elevated that the process is forgot about. Development gets pushed to the back seat almost every single weekend in those situations where these kids are where the
Yeah.
adults' emotions win. And I would love to see it go back to league ball. When I think about what professional baseball is, we play, 150 games, whatever it is. Big leagues is 162. Minor leagues, I think, was around 150. I mean, it's a game almost every single night. That's not what youth baseball is. I understand that. but the process plays out throughout a whole season,
Right.
and we're expecting some results. The organizations want to see growth. Okay. And that's, you start getting weeded out when you can't cut it. um but that's also a different point in these athletes' lives where you better start being able to figure this out again against the best competition in the world,
Right.
or it's just going to be seen that you just simply don't have it. It is what it is. um but the process is, it literally never ends. I mean, even these guys in the big leagues, if they go out there and they have a bad series, if they have a bad month, you know the process is just understood so much better, I think, at that level. And don't get me wrong, there's definitely politics in professional baseball. A lot of, when it comes to minor league baseball, politics has to do with draft slot, signing bonuses, how much we have invested in you, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, I can see
There's a
that.
lot of different components that come into politics. But again, I think I've shared it before, when I was with the Angels, the goal, a developmental goal, which I wish every youth team coaches were able to set developmental goals before the season even started. Um, their goal was for each position guy to finish the season with at least 200 at bats, right? So think about what 200 at bats is and what can happen, the growth that we're looking for, and that is only possible with so many at bats,
Right.
from the beginning of the season to the end of the season. Right. And in youth baseball, these kids get 10 to 15 at bats in a weekend, and boom, panic buttons hit, kids drop to the bottom of the lineup, right? Maybe he's even
Yep.
put on the bench, so the understanding of the process of development in the youth world, and it even happens in high school. I've seen it happen at college ball too. It's just the panic button is so quick, and maybe it's all relative to, it being a shorter season, but I really just, the tournament style is not healthy in many ways. Um, but when it comes to development, unless you have the right coaches there, the right mindset in the adults, more often than not, it's not going to be true, genuine, trusting the process. It's out there. I know it is, but we just need to understand it more.
That leads me to a thought that I actually had this conversation with a coach yesterday about high level performing people, whether that's in business or athletics or whatever, football, basketball, whatever sport, corporate America, whatever. You know, in my mind, my thought is they love the sport, but it's more about the competition than it is the sport itself. And that's why when you see people who excel in a sport, they also are competitive in a lot of other things in their life, whether no matter what they do, they're going to go be competitive at that. And so that
Mhm.
leads me to think it's actually the it's the chance and the possibility that I can lose that people actually like. The fact that I can get beat, the fact that I could possibly not measure up, that's what drives people who are really competitive and really do well in sports. Because if you take that away and then it was just nothing but success and it's nothing but winning, that takes away that yin and yang of why we do this. The yin and yang of this thing, that ebb and flow of this, is that I could get beat today and I could lose my spot. And there is, for lack of a better word, an addiction or a desire. People like that aspect of that. To have long-term success in a sport, you have people they like the competition. And without the possibility of failure or loss, there is no competition. So in a sense, people they like the fact that they could lose. But in that, their mindset is in a way that they learn from that. They like that because that's how they become the best versions of themselves. That's how they rise above. That push, that grind, that conflict, so to speak, that thing in front of me. I mean, it's why people climb mountains. I mean, I have no desire to climb a mountain, but people climb mountains because they're like, I want to get to the top of that because it's there. There's something inside them that pushes them that I might not be able to do that. And that's where I think a lot of people miss the aspect of athletics when they get older. As players get older, it's that aspect that I could lose, that's part of it. And the great athletes, the good athletes, they like the fact that that's why there's so many athletes that gamble, because they get the same kind of rush from gambling, because there's the chance you could lose. And I think you have to embrace that, because that is actually part of what the whole thing is about. That I could get beat, I could actually get embarrassed, but I'm willing to put myself on the line to prove to myself that I have what it takes, basically. Like I'm going to put myself out there because I want to know, do I have what it takes? Am I willing to put my ego aside and be embarrassed to put myself out there to go, no, I can do this. And I, you take people like Tom Brady. Why would he play till he's 43 years old or 40, whatever age he was? And I know he loves football. That's obvious, but it's more than just his love for football that drives. I mean, you played 14 years of pro ball, and it was your love for baseball, but it was also, there's something deeper there that drives people to do those things. It's what, like I said, it's what drives people to run marathons and climb mountains. And it's really this overcoming of self. It's this, do I have what it takes to be able to do that? And you have to be able to accept failure, and you have to be able to just roll with it to be able to do those things. And that's just a part of life. If you're going to do anything in this life that's what significant, you're going to fail, and you're going to have to deal with failure, and you're just going to have to be like, and when you do, you have to own it. I think that's a big deal with our culture right now. I think kids, I deal with my oldest daughter all the time. She'll say this, and I'll be like, no, it wasn't the umpires, it wasn't your teammates. No, that's on you. Like that. Well, so and so made an error. I was like, yeah, but you walked a girl before that. Well, that girl don't score if we don't make an error. And I'm like, well, no, she don't score if you don't walk her. And that's
the tough lesson for them to learn.
But that's part. But if she can get that into her, that it's okay.
Yep.
Like, you walked her, but it's not the end of the world. Like, I own that. The moment she can do that, then she can be like, okay, yeah, that's on me. So next time I'm not going to walk that girl, and it's tough conversation. But if she'll get into that, if she can get past her own self on that, and then what can happen is when she's going through game summaries of what she did, instead of going, dang, she can go, if I make that pitch there and I don't walk this girl here, then her next outing's better. You know how it is. And now I'm learning from those things, because I've let my pride and my ego go, and really being able to take and it's hard. I have a good friend of mine named Dave Goff. He does a lot of personal coaching with people. And he told me something one time. He said the contents in the bottle can't read their own label. The ketchup in the bottle can't read its own label. A lot of times it's somebody outside the bottle's got to help you see what your label is, what you're labeling yourself. You can't even read it. And so being able to emotionally detach from our performance and get a 40,000 foot view of everything can really help. And I think that's one of the ways some of the best performers in life, they're able to detach emotionally from it and get an objective 40,000 foot view of it, and not judge it personally, their own performance, and be okay. Yeah, I need to fix this, and this, and then let it go, and then go into the next one but we get all entangled with it emotionally, and we think it's our identity, and we think, well, we suck and we're no good. And the more you just wrestle with that, the bigger it's like a piece of gum that you just keep adding gum to, and next thing you know, you've got this massive piece of gum you're chewing on. The more you wrestle with that emotion, the bigger it becomes. But if you can let that go and look at it objectively and not wrestle with it emotionally, then you can let it go and learn from it. And that's ultimately what it's what you're ultimately trying to teach anybody, because even, and we've talked about this, whether you play to you're 40 years old or you play to you're 14 years old, eventually you're going to not play. You're going to
Hmm.
not play one day. And so there's most people, they live more life not playing than they live playing. And I think we lose sight of
Wow.
that as coaches, parents, as players. Like, I think, you're 20 years old and you're playing, you think it's never going to end, but it's going to end. Eventually they're going to look at you and be like, you're not good enough to play anymore. Whether that's due to age or due to talent. And so realizing that it's about a being able to overcome self, our own ego, our own pride, and be able to learn and grow, that's ultimately what the game should be teaching us anyways.
The excuse making, I think, is something that all of us as young athletes did. I don't think there's not one of us that did it at some point, especially when we were younger. I know that early in my career as a professional that I was guilty of it dang near every time I took the mound.
Right.
I remember times being out there competing, thinking, if my shortstop would have done this, then this is what the situation would be. But this is where we're at. Or if the umpire would have called that, it should be this count, but instead it's this count. Right. And
Yep.
those thoughts are debilitating. They put us in a constant state of blaming, making excuses, lacking responsibility, lacking
Absolutely.
accountability. And that's probably one of the biggest culprits of leading to inconsistent performance, is because our
I would agree.
we're not looking inward. We're so focused on all the externals, the uncontrollables, and getting better at that self-evaluation. You shared that your daughter, giving those excuses and, your rebuttal to her, you know, that wouldn't have happened if you didn't walk that batter. I wish I would have had somebody that would have called me out on that stuff as a young high
Right.
school athlete. And I've had these conversations with my father, and he acknowledges that he just wasn't aware of it. I remember, way back when I played as a young adult, there was no video or FaceTime or cell phone or that stuff. So I would talk to my dad on the phone the next morning after a start, and it was all excuses. Now that I think about it, if I had a good game, it was all about the things I did well. And if we had a bad game, it was all about what my teammates and the umpires did wrong.
Right.
And that, when I look back on it, man, I wasn't even close to being ready. Like not even close.
Yeah.
Like if those are a constant part of my way of thinking, I am nowhere near as good and prepared and ready as I think I am.
Yeah,
Now
man,
now that
that's
now that I,
so
now
good.
that I reflect on it, um, I just wrote about this, I think yesterday, and I'm gonna go to self-evaluation real quick. I remember back in 2003, I was in AAA with the Rockies, and I had a pitching coach, Bob McClure. He had a great career, really long career, 13 or 14 years in the big leagues, not just professional, but in the big leagues. More of a relief pitcher, left-handed pitcher. And I wrote this, and I don't recall what led to this happening, but I threw a bullpen, and it was in Colorado Springs. I mean, it was so impactful. I still remember it to this day, the moment and what the whole situation was. And he started telling me every pitch that I threw, whatever the pitch was, whatever pitch type it was, he started telling me how much higher than the bottom of the strike zone it was. So we're talking about how do you induce more ground balls? How do you get the batter to hit the ball
Yep.
on the ground more often? And he would call it out 5 inches too high, 6 inches too high, 12 inches a foot too high.
Yeah.
That's almost perfect. That's right at the bottom of the zone. And again, we're shooting for right below the kneecap. That's what we're shooting for when I throw a fastball down or a pitch at the bottom of the zone. And when he was doing that, I remember how it affected me. I'm thinking like, man, that's a good pitch. I that's a good low strike, but I started to realize like that's not as low as I think it is. The difference is a strike at the knees. I have a higher chance of that getting a ground ball than the strike 4 inches above the knees.
Right.
6 inches above the knees for you as a batter, that's giving you an easier height of a pitch to hit in the air, whether it's a line drive or a fly ball.
Yep.
And 12 inches, man, I'm asking for trouble. Even if I'm on the corner, I'm still asking for trouble.
Yep.
Okay. I get a foot and a half below the bottom of the zone, that becomes more belt high. Even though it's a strike and the umpire, if it's not hit, it's called a strike. For me, I end up realizing that's not a quality strike, especially if it's on the outer half of the plate. If I miss and or if I not that I miss, but if I go inside half of the or inside corner and I'm up a little bit, I have that's a harder pitch to hit than the pitch, mid thigh, belt high away. Um, it's just as hitters, especially with the higher velocity, it's just a harder pitch to catch up to,
Right.
unless you're lefties usually like all those inside pitches. But I remember that bullpen being so it was a game changer for me, and it made me from that point forward, when I would throw a pitch in a game, it made me realize and made me look at things a little bit different. And I remember getting more concerned and focused on getting the pitch down. Like I ended up, if I'm going to throw a low pitch, I need to tell myself if I'm going to miss, I'm going to miss below the glove, not above the glove.
Yeah.
Right. And
Good point.
that sort of mentality, again, for me, this was a changing moment. Maybe not everybody it would, but from that point forward, it just elevated my game, and I got better at throwing low strikes, and I got better at throwing at the top of the zone or above the top of the zone when I wanted to. I just got better because it was just a different level of focus about how I wanted to execute those pitches. And
It took somebody making you accountable to that, though, right?
yeah, absolutely. And, I remember giving up, jam shots that would end up blooping over the infielder's head and telling myself, man, that was a weak hit. Batter just got lucky. And later, when I went through that bullpen session with Mac and I started understanding pitch execution better, like the reason he was able to fist it over the infielder was because I missed up in the zone too much. If
Yeah.
I get that down, if I get the ball down, not what the hitter did, if I get the hitter did what he was supposed to do, he fought it off.
Yeah.
But if I get that pitch down where I'm want to throw it, I have a better chance at getting the results I want to get. Right. So even acknowledging that the reason that guy got that blue pit was because of me and where I threw the ball.
Yeah.
Versus, making the excuse like that was a weak hit, you got lucky. Right.
Right.
And the hitter's job is to, fight off a pitch like that, especially if they have two strikes. But, that self-evaluation part, when we get better at it, we have a different view of failure, and it's, I threw a strike, but I failed at putting the ball where I wanted to. This is what I need to do different to get the ball down, right? I need to feel I'm on top of it, throwing it down versus behind it, throwing through whatever verbiage works, right?
Right.
But the more and more we do it and we evaluate that moment a little bit better, more with better detail and pure accountability, puts us in a mindset and a place of just getting better. And again, these are the little things that if we can help change athletes' ways at looking at failure versus, like I said, a blue pit. The hitter did their job. I didn't do my job, even though it was a strike, right? And if I get better at acknowledging that little tiny failure, and again, this is a game of inches. You know, if I threw that pitch 6 inches lower, I get better results.
Yep.
You know, and it has nothing to do with the batter getting lucky. It has to do with me not doing my job the way that I needed to in that moment.
You was talking about that whole segment right there was good, man, because I was in the same boat with my dad. There were so many things. It's for another podcast, but just the way my whole career ended and just the meltdown mentally that I had emotionally was epic. Something I'm not very proud of. But on the flip side of that, I didn't have anybody to help me. None of my coaches, my dad didn't know how to, and my coaches didn't try. But that's one of the reasons I'm so actively involved with my daughter is to try to go, hey, you know, I can help you navigate that because nobody helped me navigate those things. And man,
Mm-hmm.
I ran into so many landmines just because nobody said, hey, man, you need to change how you think about that. You need to change how you feel about that. And I just didn't. And eventually I just became my own worst enemy and self-sabotage and just imploded upon my own self.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that goes back to why do people innately have a hard time dealing with failure, not just in sports, but just in general? I mean, whether that's a failed marriage, a failed business, a failed relationship with a friend, whatever that may be. And you said something a while ago that hit the nail on the head. You was talking about we look externally instead of looking internally. And
Mm-hmm.
we look and we blame all this stuff externally instead of taking ownership and accountability internally, because we get so much of our identity and who we think we are from what other people think about us, and whether that's our stat line or the pats on the back, or like you were talking about, like, man, I throw hard, or I can hit the ball 500 feet, or whatever that may be. I have a cannon for an arm from the outfield, and we have these certain tools that start defining who we are. And then when those things start failing us and we start not having success with it because our identity's wrapped up so much in that, we think we are those things. Then when we fail, we think it's us. We think we are a failure. And so then it plays an emotional and a mental just chess game with ourselves because we don't know how to detach who we actually are from what we do. And we get so performance driven that we think we are good when we perform well and we're not good when we perform bad. And I actually had a high school girl say this to me the other night, and I actually need to go back and address this. We were in the middle of practice because I've been working with them hitting, and I should have addressed it then, but it just skipped my mind. But there was a girl up there hitting, and the girl hitting can rake. And this other girl, she goes, has she always been good at softball? And I was like, yeah, for the most part. But I said, she works hard at this. Like, she works hard at what she does. And that girl, she goes, well, I work hard too, but I still suck. And there is the component of, and I don't know at what age, there is an age where it's like sometimes people have more talent than we do. There are people who are just
Mm-hmm.
more naturally gifted. They're stronger, or whatever that may be. Um, but at the same time, for that girl, she has to understand that she don't have to be this other kid or be jealous or want these other things for her to be who she can be. Her performance doesn't have to be, she don't have to hit the ball out of the yard. She can do what she does. And I think some of the best athletes and some of the most happy athletes are the ones who are able to go, this is what I do. You know, I throw 88 miles an hour. I don't throw 98 miles an hour, but I'm going to get the best out of my 88 I can get. And I'm not going to blow fastballs by you, but I'm going to learn how to pitch, and I'm going to change speeds, and I'm going to be me. And my performance is not based on other people. It's not based on what somebody else can do. I'm not comparing myself. You know, there's a scripture in the Bible that Paul talked about. He goes, it's not wise that you compare yourself among yourself, meaning like when you start comparing yourself to other people, it's unwise because you'll always be better than some and you won't be as good as others. And that's really hard to do in the sports world because we want to compare, because if we feel like we're being judged all the time, you know, we feel like we're being judged because it's competitive. You know, I've got to beat this person out to keep my spot and all these different things.
Mhm.
But the really satisfied athletes are the ones who go, this is my skill set. I'm going to take it and be the best I can. And that's just, I'm going to be happy with me. And I think at the end of the day, and I've preached this to players for a while, and you actually have a shirt. Attitude and effort are the only two controllable things in your control. Everything else is it's
Mhm.
out of your control. You can't control what other players do. You can't control what pitches you're going to get in your at bat. You just got to play the hand you're dealt. But your attitude and effort's what you can control. And if you can go out and have a good attitude and you can bust your tail and feel like you compete, if you felt like you competed, you can walk off that field and feel good about yourself, win, lose, or draw. And I think that's ultimately what I would want all of the people who I ever help to understand, is that if you do those things and you were able to compete, no fear, laid it on the line, you can lose and you can walk off there and you can go, I feel good about myself. And that's one of the things that I would really like. That's one of the things I would really stress to young athletes, is that there's only two controllables in this game, and that's your attitude and effort. And if you do those 100%, and parents too, if your kids are having good attitudes and it's 100% effort and they're getting out there, then man, go get ice cream, win, lose, or draw. You know, that's old, because that's the only thing they can control in this game. That's
Mhm.
it. And if they're doing those things, they ought to feel good about themselves.
One of the realities of life is that you're always being judged, and it's never going to end. You know, whether you're
It
an
will not.
athlete
That's right.
or you're an employee, you run a business, you what you put on social media, you are always going to be judged. And the ultimate goal for anybody is confidence, self-confidence,
Yep.
belief. You know, we trust in what we're doing in life, that I'm being honest and I'm putting forth the effort that I need to do to get better, to provide. But we're always going to be judged, whether it's family members or friends or
Yep.
teammates or coaches or scouts, recruiters. Like, you're literally always judged. Teachers. We have to become almost numb to that. You
We
know,
do.
we have to become used to it. We have to understand that it's just a part of life. And a lot of these young athletes put the pressure on themselves because of it. You know, and
We
they
do.
feel like, they fail. Who's watching? Who saw that? What are they thinking? They become so concerned in that. Those uncontrollables, that again, I've used it before. It's debilitating. It will, being so concerned with how you're being judged, um, will crush you from one moment to the next.
It
And
will, absolutely.
again, I really think that these are things that need to be talked about. Coaches need to talk about it. They need to be honest with the players that when you're out there competing, this is what we're looking for. And
Yep.
if you're not doing your part, that there needs to be a relationship there too, that, with you and your daughter, for example, you know, there's a lot of parents and athletes that their relationship isn't the type of relationship where the athlete takes the feedback from their parent
Right.
correctly. There's a
Yep.
lot of relationships, and I've worked with a ton of these families over the years where I can say the same thing that dad says, but because of all the other things that have gone on between son and father in their life together,
Yeah. They
it's
can't receive
received
it.
differently. It's received differently from me as an outside voice than it is as dad who
Right.
has that father figure. And that's, um, you know, for you and your daughter to have that relationship is huge, and one thing that you need to be prepared for is that she is a teenager, and teenage brains, just like we were, teenage brains are all over the place, and she may
All the
wake up
time.
tomorrow and stop listening.
Yep.
And that's where, having those outside voices is huge. And if we as parents can find, outside mentors for our children, it's for us to find people that we trust, that I want my kid to spend time around that person because of who they are and how they can help. My oldest, who's 20 now, he'll be 21 next year. He recently worked a job where, it wasn't a really healthy situation just because the people who he was around. And then now he's at a job where, and I know these men he's working with, and they are just great people. And
Yep.
it gives my heart as a parent, it gives me a peace of mind knowing
Absolutely.
that my child is now spending 40 hours a week around great people. And you know he's an apprentice electrician right now, and the career, what he ends up doing, it is what it is. But for him to spend time around people like that is, I mean, even little things like that could set him up and put him, teaching him how, to be the type of
Absolutely.
person that we want him to be as a parent. um,
Right.
these are things that go way beyond anything that any athlete does out on a field.
That's right.
And I think that is missed so much. Like, as parents, if we find, good people for our kids to spend time with, man, I will have my kid on a losing team and not give one iota about what that scoreboard says.
That's
If
right.
that adult is an impactful person on who my child may end up growing, I'm all in.
Yep.
I'm all in.
Yeah.
I think so much emphasis gets put on all this other stuff that, um again, the youth world almost encourages it, but we just need to have a better vision of what that is. And this whole, segment today is on dealing with failure, but um that relationship is key on how to process the failure when it comes to athlete adult, communication.